Hey there, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It is the wee hours of Thursday morning, December 8th. Just wanted to check in quick and say how much I enjoyed this discussion with Maximiliano Campos of the Blind Hour podcast. Max went blind at 12 from a degenerative eye condition. His family moved from Brazil to Boston that same year to help get him some treatment. And he's got a pretty awesome attitude. If you need a social worker, he has a bachelor's and two master's degrees and is looking for a job. We get into that. We get into the Americans with Disabilities Act. We get into porn for the blind and rollerblading blind. Yeah, porn for the blind and rollerblading blind. So strap on in and enjoy. Welcome. I'm glad to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. I think it will be a lot of fun.
So I kind of wanted to start out, since we're just meeting now for the first time. I've listened to your a few episodes of your show, The Blind Hour, and I imagine you listened to an episode or two of this, so I just kind of babble. I thought maybe introduce yourself a little bit and tell your story, because you've got a story.
All right. Okay. So my name is Maximiliano, but most people call me Max. I think that's usually easier. It's kind of like what I got used to introducing myself as now. So it's just Max most of the time. It's just one of those things where like I like my name, but it's just a little too long.
Little too much of a tongue twister for some people.
Hmm?
Little too much of a tongue twister for some people.
Oh, yes. I get all sorts of things like Maxo, Maximo, and Maxwell. I'm like, I don't know where they see the W there. Get all sorts of things.
You get those impatient people up there in Massachusetts, so...
That's true. They're probably saying it before even reading it, So, okay, a little bit of my story, I guess. That's not to go, so I was born in Brazil. I'm originally from Brazil, and we moved to the U.S. when I was 12. And the reason why we moved is because when I was about 8 or 9, I got diagnosed with something called retinitis pigmentosa, which is basically a degenerative genetic illness, and it affects the retina, as the name kind of implies, and so I started losing my sight actually after we moved. But the reason why we moved was that my parents had friends here, and they kind of mentioned, oh, in Boston, there's this place called the Mass Eye and Ear, and there's this, they just happened to have, one of the doctors working there just happened to be world renowned for like being one of the best doctors who worked with retinitis pigmentosa. And so my parents kind of made the decision then of like, hey, let's go try this stuff out. I mean, things weren't really 100% in Brazil as it was in terms of the economy and all of those things. So that was kind of even more of a reason for them to decide to move, and so we moved here, and probably I'd say about 7 months later or so, I ended up losing my sight, which was, not much fun, kind of a bunch of stuff going on all at once.
Yeah, and 12 years old, you're right in it anyway. Like you've already you understand the world, and you can see the world around you, and you really comprehend by that age too.
Yeah, and it was, it was a lot of things kind of happening all at once, and I had an idea that it would happen, because I remember when I was about 10, a cousin of mine I went to stay over his house, and he was like, oh, I just overheard my mother talking to your mom, and she mentioned that the doctor said you could lose your sight by the time you're around by the time you're 18. And so my thought was like, oh shit, that's that's not, as
Was
like
that
an
the first time you
11-year-old.
found out?
Yeah, that was the first time I
Oh,
found
no.
out. Like, as a 10-year-old, like, oh crap.
Well, and it wasn't even like your parents telling you. It was like your friend telling you that he overheard your parents talking. Oh man.
Yeah, because it was one of those. I don't know, what. I always go back with this whole way that my parents kind of dealt with the whole thing, and even somehow how I deal with it to this day, or maybe how I chose to deal with it, has a lot to do with kind of like uh, the culture, the Brazilian culture at the time, and kind of it being really hard to accept this kind of thing. And I think it still happens, it happens here in the US as it is anyway, it happens to this day. Um, there, there's still people who have a hard time accepting these types of things, or like even figuring out like, okay, what is a person who's going to be blind going to do with his or her life, So I think there was a lot of that, and there was a lot of like fears and insecurities that they had of even like mentioning that to me. It would have been nice. But,
It would have been nice not to be surprised with it. Huh?
yeah, exactly.
So how old are you now? Let me ask.
So I'm 31 now.
Okay.
So I've been so okay, I lost my sight when I was around 13 or about to turn 13. Yeah, so I've been blind for 14 years. Wait, 14. My math is horrible. That's like, it's like 18 years.
So, did you have a period then? I mean, man, adolescence is tough enough, and then like you're in a new country. Did you have this period where just like things are like really bad, or how what was your attitude like from the time you were like 13, 14, 15 when you were just getting used to this new blindness?
So for me, I think I was actually able to take it pretty well. I think I like I mentioned, I kind of had an idea that it was going to happen. Obviously, it happened way before I expected it, but when it did happen, it was kind of like this thought of like, oh crap, that really sucks, but hey, whatever. I kind of had an idea it was going to happen anyway. So in some ways, even though I was just about to basically be a teenager, turn 13 years old, I think that actually kind of helped in a way, for me personally, at least. I know that for some people it would have been a different story, because I've met people who lost their sight at around the same age, and till this day they have a lot of trouble accepting it. And for me, I think that being in a new place actually ended up helping in some way, because I was like making new friends, learning a new language, and trying to go to school and all these things. There was like so much going on that maybe in some ways, not made me forget about what was happening, but at least kind of.
It was just one more thing at this point.
Yeah. It's like, hey, who'd have ever thought, just another thing to deal with.
So as you got through high school and you kind of grew up, did you find the answers to those questions? Like, what do you do as a blind adult in the U.S. in this world?
It's like, for me personally, I feel that I was able to figure some stuff out for myself. And we'll touch on it a little later, but like having this background of psychology and social work, it for me now in the present, I look back at it and kind of think of like, I actually lucked out, and I was able to have a better attitude than most people, I think, and be able to figure out what I wanted to do. It was definitely difficult, because even with rehabilitation counseling services,
Mhm.
with like voc rehab counselors and things like that, I had times where I kind of got into a bit of a fight with some of them because they would. I remember when I was actually applying to go to college, and my voc rehab counselor saying like, "Oh, why are you going to college? You know, there's this factory nearby, and you can like." They hire a lot of blind people, and you can work there, like, you know, putting together these brooms and mops and things. And I was like, okay, I'm not disrespecting that, but it's not what I kind of see myself doing, you know? It's like I've gone all these years through like dealing with the crappiness of being a teenager going through high school, you know, to like go, and now that I'm applying to college, all of a sudden decide that like, oh no, I'm just going to work at this factory because they hire blind people there, you know?
Didn't sound like a fulfilling life for you.
No, and it kind of it disappointed me then, and it, as I think back on it, it actually disappoints me even more now, having, you know, the coming from the background that I have in terms of all the schooling and all that stuff, because it's like, why would someone who is there to help you succeed and kind of basically grow as a person, as an individual, want to in some ways limit you, you know? So I remember kind of always struggling with that and kind of going through that a few times with my rehab counseling, my rehab counselors and all that. So it was always a bit of a struggle. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think set you apart at that time? And it sounds like, okay, I'm gonna make an assumption about your counselors at this point, actually, and say that they probably came in to their jobs really wanting to help people and really wanting to push people forward and let them be the best they could be, and they probably got cynical along the way and said, well, everybody's just going to work at that factory. I'm going to tell people to go work at that factory. What sets you apart from everybody else who just said, okay, yeah, it sounds like a good idea, I'll just go work at the factory, that you were like, I want to go work at that factory. I'm gonna go explore the world. What did you wind up? What do you think kind of brought you? Gave you that attitude, and then brought you to the next step with college and everything.
Okay, so I think part of it definitely I would have to attribute to kind of coming from the background that I came from, where basically there was this expectation that like, okay, the next generation is going to do more with their life than the previous generation, and kind of having to deal with some of the struggles that my family had to deal with financially or whatever it was when we lived in Brazil. So there was definitely some of it that was based on expectation of, oh, you're supposed to go to college and you're supposed to do all these things. But then also, once I was in high school and started like taking electives and all these things, I found myself really liking, the idea of learning, the idea of having something new to take from people, and kind of like listening to the teachers and later on the professors, and being able to take some of that with me. That idea fascinated me, and so I had a just this drive of like, okay, I want to do two things. I want to learn, and I want to help other people, because I know that I'm not being helped the way that I would like to be helped at this point. So, I kind of had this idea of like, hey, I'm gonna save the world. I'm gonna be the ultimate, psychologist or rehab counselor or whatever it was. As a you obviously know that you're not going to change everything, but I guess like for myself, I always thought, hey, as long as I can do the work the best way possible for me and for, the clients that I will have later on, and I'm learning things along the way from my clients, from professors, from teachers, then that's really worth it for me. So I had this drive all along to just kind of, I guess just growing as an individual who is able to just absorb things. I always have this thing about I always have this thing that I say a lot, that for me, usually the answers don't matter so much, and it's more about the questions. And I kind of always have questions, and I think it's interesting to get everyone else's answers, and not necessarily that I want, a concrete answer from people, but I want to learn and understand what other people think about whatever the question may be, and I think that was a drive that I had all along. So it definitely kind of drove me to want to go forward with my education and have this drive to go to college and do all these things and work with people and try to bring some of my experiences into the work that I was doing in a way that I'd be able to, always be learning more and more, and always be helping the clients as I could, so.
Right on. So is that so you went into counseling, rehab, the kind of stuff that people were trying to help you with and they weren't being so helpful?
So I went for clinical psychology.
Uh-huh.
I did that and got my bachelor's, did a lot of like volunteer work and internships and all this stuff in that area. Then I graduated in 2008, which was right around the time when the job market was really down.
Yeah, it was not a good time to be getting out of school.
Yeah, it was definitely not the best time to have graduated, and obviously that was a bit of a shock because, as a kid, and even earlier on, not only in Brazil, but even after moving here to the US in high school and stuff, you always heard like, oh no, if you go to college right away, as soon as you get out of college, then you'll have a job waiting for you, because
Right.
you have the education and all that. So I'm sitting there like, oh crap, nothing's happening. I'm sending all these applications. What do I do? And my thought was always to have a private practice, because I felt that would be the way that I would best be able to help people, because I'd be able to kind of do things in my own terms rather than, working at an agency where you're kind of dependent on meeting deadlines and filling out paperwork that, sometimes it's not 100% necessary. You end up spending more time filling out paperwork and working on a computer than actually with the clients, So that was my thought. And in order to do that in psychology, I would need at least a PhD.
Okay.
So my shortcut was, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to get a master's of social work, because this way, it's a bit of a shortcut to getting a social work to be a licensed social work and kind of open a private practice, because it ends up being a very similar job. You just don't do as much of the research portion of it. It's more of the
Gotcha.
counseling part of it and stuff. So I went for that for my master's in social work. After that, again, same experience, looking for jobs and everything, and nothing is happening. I graduated with that in 2012. And then in 2013, I ended up getting divorced. And I decided to go to Brazil to do some volunteer work. I stayed there for 11 months. Came back, and I thought, okay, now I have international experience working. I have all this other experience from previous volunteer work and internships. I have a master's. I have, my my bachelor's, all these things. Now I'm definitely going to get a job, again.
Still not.
That went on for another year of like sending applications and going to job interviews and everything. So I decided to go back again and do a master's in rehabilitation counseling, which is, kind of where I actually just finished that this year. And now I'm in the basically same place I was before, sending the job applications and all that. But it's definitely I guess it kind of evolved all along, from the psychology to the social work and to the rehab counseling. They're all very connected in some ways, but it kind of got more and more specific to working with people with disabilities and impairment with the rehab counseling stuff.
So are you still thinking that private practice is where you're going to end up someday, or?
That would be the goal, when I get that chance of when I'm given that chance of getting a job, and be able to show that I'm actually able to do the job that I'm applying for, because that tends to be the thing, and it happens so much. It happens in general, but especially in the disabled community.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of other people who also have degrees and are still kind of struggling to find jobs, because I think one of the things that people end up forgetting is that even though it's not really talked about that much as maybe it's talked about in regard to other things, there's still a lot of bias and prejudice toward and stereotypes as well toward people with impairments and disabilities. So when you're applying for jobs, you would think that it wouldn't be that big of a thing, if you have the experience and you have the education, but it ends up having an impact on whether or not you get a job. So the thought is, once I'm able to get a job and let people know, hey, I've had over 5.5 years of experience working in this field through internships, volunteer positions. I have all these degrees. Now give me a chance to show you that I can do it. And once I'm able to do that, the idea definitely is to go forward in a few years and do the private practice, because I still think that is where you get, maybe I'll have less clients and maybe it won't be as profitable in some ways, but I will be able to do the job. I don't want to say better, because I will be performing to the best of my abilities regardless of where I'm working, but maybe in a way where I can try to have a bigger impact and spend more time with my clients rather than in front of a computer or staff meetings or whatever it is.
Well, and you have this thing that other people don't have, right? Like, somebody with, I don't know, I hesitate to use the word disability because it doesn't seem to be like impairing you at all. But somebody who is just doing the job and has all the empathy, but has no experience, trying to get around in the world, with some otherness, right? Like, I mean, so I want to actually step back and kind of ask you to tell people a little bit about like how you experience the world, because what I'm seeing is we're on a video call, much like Skype, we're using Zoom, and here's what I see and just how I've changed, kind of just as we've gotten on the call. We started up and the lights aren't on in the room where you are. Like, why would they be, right? Like, I mean, of course they're not on. Like, it's not helping you any, right? You're not centered on the screen. It doesn't matter. Like, fine, whatever. And I'm making all these hand gestures, and while you're talking, I find myself nodding, like, I'm gonna help you. Like nonverbal cues are not. I get the feeling they're the stuff that I've learned to use with sighted people are not. They're not helping the conversation any. they don't seem to be hurting any. There aren't these awkward silences where I'm just shaking my head and you're waiting for a response. But so how do you experience the world a little differently?
Okay, so actually for that, I think that my personal experience is that having had sight before is a plus. You know, I've met people who kind of go back and forth on that, and people who say like, "Oh, I would have rather like never had sight before," or all that. And I actually feel like that is for myself, it's a plus. You know, like if we were talking in person here in this room, I would probably be able to tell when you're, when you're nodding or when you're doing, hand gestures and stuff. And obviously this is on the computer. So, I'm hearing your voice and I can't see the camera. So it's a little different, but I've learned to kind of, because obviously, I since I lost my sight when I was 13, I had already developed like these nonverbal like gestures as well when communicating with people, so I myself do a lot of nodding and like shaking of the head and then like moving my hands around and stuff and doing things. So it's but for me in that regard, when I'm talking to somebody in person in the same room, I can have a pretty good idea just because it's something that I have already experienced. So I can kind of, understand when that's happening a little better, The light for me has always been an issue being in places that are too bright. So even when I was sighted, I would always, come home and
Yeah, I'm getting a little internet freeze here.
kind of know the.
I think we kind of, yeah, I think we froze up here, Max. 1 second here.
Of course.
Okay, I think we're back.
All right.
So,
I can just go back to that.
Yeah, your last like 10 seconds or so.
Okay. And as far as the, just
we're
the
talking
light,
about light. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just the lights in the room. For me, the light has always been an issue, and it's actually something that even to this day, the only thing I see is light. So I'd get home and the first thing I'd do would always be, okay, turn off all the lights and, have maybe like the TV on or something like that. But lights were always something that kind of bugged me a little bit. But so the way that I see things, let's say if I'm walking around outside, if you can imagine, I've described it like this already a few times to other people. And if you're in a dark room and you get, I don't know, maybe your cell phone or a flashlight or something like that, your eyes are already adjusted to the darkness. Mm-hmm. And then you turn the light on and you focus it in your eyes and you kind of wave that light around the room. And when you turn off the cell phone screen or the flashlight or whatever it is, you will have all these floating, these floaters, all these lights that kind of stay in your field of vision while your eyes are adjusting back to the dark room. Yep. So basically that's what I see 24/7 is just these floaters all the time, just random flashes of light and things, because my retina still has all the light receptors, but it doesn't have, the ability to take all of that information and kind of transmit that over to the part of my brain that would say like, oh, okay, this is what you're seeing. Okay. Or, so basically I have the light information. It just doesn't know what to do with it, Gotta get stuck.
So that's cool that you kind of understand the science of it too. I feel like not a lot of people, kind of take that route.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's I'm probably not using the most technical terms for all of this stuff, but I think that it's actually easier to kind of describe it like this in a way that like everyone can kind of understand that, the idea of the flashlight in the dark room and all of that. Um,
Yeah.
so it gives people a good idea of what it might look like for me as I'm just like walking around. If I'm, like I was saying earlier, if we were talking in the same room, I'd be like making, I'd be looking at you as I'm talking to you and everything. And, I, I always get the whole like, oh, you don't look blind thing, when when I'm talking to people. So, and but that would basically be what I'd be seeing as I would be talking to you. I would just be able to, tell where you were based on the sounds and everything. Um, Another thing that people always kind of tend to talk about when you lose your sight is how your hearing gets better. It definitely gets more acute, but I've kind of ruined that by playing a lot of drums. So, so it might be worse now than it was before.
How about colors?
um, I always had. I don't see any right now, but when I was young, I could see colors, but there would be random times. There was no like specific reason for it that I can remember at least, where there would be random times where I would look at different like colored pencils or something like that, or markers, and be like, what color is this? I couldn't tell them apart, or like I'd have two different colors, one next to the other, and I couldn't tell them apart.
Mhm.
It would happen randomly, which was always interesting to me, that like I would be able to see it and all of a sudden not. I always did a lot of art. Like I always drew a lot and painted a lot and all of that, and so I could see it, but there would be times where it just ended up kind of, I don't know, like it would basically be like all of a sudden everything lost its color, so
Okay.
you're kind of like confused with like, okay, is this green or blue or yellow or what?
But you have some understanding of what those colors are, uh,
Yes.
which is different from people who are born without their sight.
Yeah.
You know, have you had conversations with people who've been blind from birth or blind from very young about color?
I have, and it actually, as you were talking, I was thinking about this funny example. I have a friend who was born blind, and he was telling me about a dream he had one time, which is a whole nother story. Like just the idea of like, as a blind person, how do you see dreams?
Oh, yeah.
But and he was telling me like, oh, you and me and these other people, we were in this red car and we were driving down to go see some fireworks, and they had like these like green and yellow fireworks, and it was making all these cool shapes and stuff. And I was like, and I remember just thinking like, well, how do you know those colors if you've never seen them?
Uh-huh.
And what he told me at least is kind of like, you know, he had an understanding of like, oh, this color is a little darker than this other color, so um so he, I guess I'd have to say he's able to also see light. So his understanding was, okay, when I close my eyes, or if someone puts their hand in front of my face and I can't see as much light anymore, that's dark. So he understood dark and light.
So he could
And
understand like a separation between like blue, like a darker blue, and like
yeah. So
yellow
he
is
he
something
kind of
brighter.
did it like that, and that was his understanding of it. Like, okay, black is like this dark, and then you kind of go through other colors, and so that was his understanding. That's how he explained it to me. I don't know. He's probably the only person that I've ever talked to about that, actually, which is kind of interesting. But I remember him mentioning this dream to me, and kind of wondering like, okay, so like first, like I wonder what his idea of what like a car looks like is, like how does he see
Yeah.
that in the dream? And I think, you know, obviously he had been in cars before, so he had some idea. But you know, there's so many different types of cars and different designs and everything, you know. And I kept thinking, like, I wonder if every single car, like in his mind, every single car has like a similar design or something, you know. And then just going into the colors part of it. So, you know, I'm assuming it's very similar to most people because I have, you know, I always hear people who are born blind talking about colors and things, and I always find it pretty fascinating. You know, it's definitely something that I'd like to kind of look into some more because I find that a really interesting aspect of blindness. You know that you know, obviously we talk about the inability of seeing things, but then there's also the ability of people's brains to basically create references for things. And so in their mind they do see things differently from us, but it's always been an interesting subject to me. It's definitely a question that I kind of find myself thinking about, like, probably more often than I should, maybe. You know what I'm saying?
Are you familiar with Daniel Tammet?
No.
No, he is. Does he have autism? He's got some severe, very strict. But he's got something that synthesizes, and it makes him a savant. And like he sees days as certain colors. Like one of his memoirs is called "Born on a Blue Day." And just that's how he remembers a lot of things, and he can do a lot of math just because he sees, like he can do calculations with huge numbers. You know, we were laughing about 31 minus
13
earlier, but he can do large numbers because he like organizes in his brain. He just kind of organizes 42 as yellow and that kind of thing. So I wonder if seeing how his brain works would help you connect to how those people are seeing colors, to how those friends you're talking about are seeing colors.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, you know, I usually, when I listen to music, that's kind of how I see it as well. Like different sounds have different colors and different like patterns and things, you know. So that's really interesting.
So you said you play a lot of drums, like kit drums, or?
Yeah. So well, I mostly play progressive metal.
Okay.
So other people just kind of never really had a full on band that went on for too long, but just messed around with people jamming around and when I was married, I didn't really have a whole lot of chances of playing drums that much. So after my divorce, I was just like, oh, I'm picking it back up, you know, and just gonna play as much as I can now. Now that I have a chance, you know, never know.
How long were you married?
Oh, I was married for 5 years. They always say that 5 is like the magic number, I guess. You know, for marriage.
Well, I've been married. It'll be 2.5 soon, so we're not quite there. So you got married young.
Yeah, when I was, let's see, here I go with my math again. 23. Yeah. So I was 23 when I got married because it was 2008. And yeah, so we stayed together for a little while. I guess that's pretty young, you know, when you think about it. It's one of those like, oh, I just, you know, just kind of out of college and thinking, I guess the thought was, you know, kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, this idea of like, oh, as soon as you have a degree, you're going to get a job and everything's going to be fine type of thing. Things aren't so good.
So, I mean, what do you doing these days? You got the podcast,
Yeah.
the Blind Hour. How long have you been doing that?
So the Blind Hour podcast, we've been doing that for about 14 months.
Okay.
And we are about to release the 100th episode special. I do all the editing and everything, so it's taking a little longer than I'd like to. It's just been a little overwhelming going back and like finding clips and talking about it. And the idea is to kind of go back and just kind of talk about some of the interesting moments that we've had and all these 99 backlogged episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been my time. I've been doing a lot of that. I've been doing a lot of trying to teach actually other blind people how to podcast, because I do have this kind of idea that the more people that we can get doing podcasts that have very specific views about things, the more interesting it gets, because a podcast is basically, there are some that are just entertainment, but there are some that you can actually go and get some
Right.
from, the Blind Hour. We have a point sometimes. But I've definitely been doing a lot of that, like trying to help people figure out like, okay, this is how you start a podcast, and been thinking about how I could maybe even make that into a more organized thing. Maybe create some type of like online courses.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you were doing that like kind of one-on-one, or whether you were developing like courses for like, Linda or, any of the other online course repositories. I may have lost you again there. Let's see.
It's interesting because I actually just started doing that, and I didn't even think about it. I went to an app a while back, and it's an app where like a lot of blind and visually impaired people kind of gather and talk to each other. It's kind of like it's basically like a Facebook type of social media stuff, but it's all through voice.
Okay.
And it's an app called Vorail, and I went on there just to basically start asking people questions so that I could get material for my podcast,
Uh-huh.
And then all of a sudden I started getting so many questions about like, oh, how do you do a podcast? How do you start one? As a blind person, like what software do you use? What like microphones, all this gear and things, So I've been helping a couple of people, and it kind of crossed my mind, like, you know what, this could be something where I can kind of, make this information a little more organized and let people know, like, oh, these are some of the ways that you can start a podcast, Yeah. So it could be interesting. It's definitely a plan that is really recent, and still kind of working it out in my own head, but it could be something that's in the near future over here for the Blind Hour podcast, maybe offering a a podcasting course or something,
Yeah, it'd be pretty awesome. And it's got it has that extra component in that you're teaching blind people, but having a podcasting course just out there is probably good for sighted people as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm guessing the main difference is going to be in the editing.
Yeah, a lot of the editing, can be done visually a lot of the times, and obviously with the way that I do it, it's all just listening to things and putting markers on the audio and clicking delete. A lot of the times they're moving things around, but that's one of the projects. And another big project that we're working on is actually we're doing a documentary about, the idea started out as it being a short piece on the Blind Hour podcast, kind of like how we got started and everything. And it's morphed into something more than that right now. It's taking on a lot of the idea that I was mentioning earlier of like, how do blind people like go and just basically live, you know? Because I was mentioning earlier how, you know, from my family's perspective, I understand that there was like a lot of fear and insecurities involved just based on the way that they saw, you know, anyone who had an impairment or whatever. And, as kind of like these people who, oh, how are they going to survive in this world, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it's taken on a lot of that, just kind of, it's obviously focuses on myself and John, the co-host of the Blind Hour podcast, but I feel like it has a much greater reach than just, you know, the two of us. Obviously, I think it's, I don't usually like referring to myself as someone who is inspirational, you know, but I think by default, the story kind of is, it tends to be an inspirational story, maybe to some people. You know, we've received comments from people who listen to the Blind Hour podcast to that, you know, to that tone too, of like, oh, you guys have inspired me in some way or whatever it is. And I think it's an interesting story to tell, you know, regardless of how I feel about it. I think it's shaping up to be pretty interesting. You know, that's definitely that's another long-term project that we recently started. So it might take a little while, but it's definitely upcoming and something that we really want to do.
So tell me a little bit about getting around day to day. In Boston, in the Boston area, you've got a really good, really easy to use public transit system.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as somebody who's taken the T and then tried to go to New York City and hop on the subway there, um, I still don't understand how that thing works.
Yeah.
For those who aren't familiar with the T, it's basically a series of trains. They've got 4 or 5 different colors, and you're either going into Boston or out. So you're either inbound or outbound, and,
Mm-hmm.
and that's it.
Yeah.
Am I taking the red train? Am I taking the red train in? Am I taking the green train out? That's it. You got to know the color. You got to know the direction. But I'm guessing that there are other places where that's not true.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm guessing Brazil is probably one of those places. You went there for 11 months, you said.
Yeah.
What's it like day to day for you getting around?
So right now, getting around, it's become much easier with things like Uber and things like that. But even without that, it's the public transportation system here works pretty well. There's a bus stop near my house, probably about 4-minute, 5-minute walk, if that. It goes straight to the train stop, and then like you were saying, I take the blue line,
Uh-huh.
coming out, going inbound to downtown Boston, and then I'm basically able to get everywhere in Boston with the train, which is really awesome. It's really great. It makes everything really accessible. Train stations are in these usually pretty good places that are near a lot of really interesting locations and pretty easy to get to locations. So, for example, there's a train that goes to the Museum of Fine Arts, but next to the Museum of Fine Arts, you also have like a bunch of little businesses and stuff like that. So it's actually pretty easy to get around and get to where you need to go in Boston. As you get, further away from Boston, obviously the public transportation starts getting a little more limited, and then it becomes a little more difficult. And that's where, a service like Uber or Lyft or something like that can definitely be really helpful. There's actually a whole thing now where the transit authority here will be working with Uber and people who have any type of impairment or are, basically disabled or have impairments, or the elderly or whatever, will get, I believe every Uber ride will be $2, and the state will, or the the transit authority will cover up to $20 after that. So that's a pretty good deal when you think about it, because
Yeah, so you're paying public transit prices, and the authority is picking up the difference so that the
yeah.
driver doesn't get shafted out of their fare.
Yeah, basically, and obviously if you go beyond, the 22, I believe it's $22. If you go like, if for some reason you're taking a ride that's going to cost you more, you pay that difference, but it's a big help. I think taking Uber, for example, from my house to downtown Boston, it was like $28. So I would have, once this goes through, I would have paid a total of $8 for a ride, basically from my doorstep to wherever I'm going. And then, $8 back or whatever, but it's still much better than taking a cab or whatever,
Oh
it's
yeah.
going to be really helpful in these situations, like I was saying, where you don't really have a lot of train access or bus access and stuff like that.
Even in places where you do, that sounds like it's a lot. That sounds like it's a much easier way to get around than walking out to the bus
Oh yeah.
stop and then waiting for the bus. Making sure you get off in the right place, figuring out the
Oh,
stairs down into the subway, and
yeah.
making sure you're transferring the right place. And
Oh
some of those stations, like you get off you go out the wrong door. Like,
yeah.
oh, I'm 4 blocks away from where I wanted to be.
Yeah, especially once the snow comes, and you kind of, that's always the blind person's worst, nightmare. And I would imagine too for someone in a wheelchair, and would be very similar.
Yeah.
Because that's always tough. All of a sudden you're supposed to walk on the sidewalk, but then they're all covered with snow, and then you have to make your way along, the streets and try to figure out where you are, and you're always kind of, as a someone who's blind, you kind of always trying to figure out basically where you're standing based on how the ground feels. Am I standing on grass? Am I standing on the middle of the street? Is this the sidewalk or whatever it is? And all of that goes away with the snow. So
Oh yeah, it all feels the same, huh?
yeah, all of a sudden, and I had a guide dog up till last year, and unfortunately I had to put her down.
No.
So that's the difference too, having to depend on the cane to get around, and especially after 8 years of working with a guide dog, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh man, now I got to go back and try to figure out how to walk around with the cane.
Right, and then train a new dog.
You know, yeah, definitely. With the guide dog, is just it's not easier because you still need to know where you're going and where you are, of course. But
Right.
there's a security there, I guess. At least for myself, I felt much safer in various different situations when I had the guide dog.
Yeah. Yeah, especially in crowded streets. I live in kind of a smaller city, so
Yeah, yeah. With the dog, it's like I remember being in New York, and this was one of the places where we did the training. Actually, we purposely went there with the idea of like, well, it's going to be packed. It's going to be insane. Ton of people. Let's see how your dog guides you around all these crazy, like New York people running around, and tourists and all these other things. And it was pretty amazing. And, that was when I first got my guide dog, and the difference was incredible. Just being able to kind of zip through like these crowded streets and sidewalks and everything, versus kind of walking with a cane and like tripping people or getting tripped or
Have you noticed a difference in the way people interact with you in public when you had the dog versus the cane?
Oh yes, definitely. There's always people are always more willing to help when I were always more willing to help when I had the dog. And this is pretty funny because we've had some footage of just me and John kind of walking around, and some GoPro footage that we plan to upload sometime online. And it's basically just us walking around town and asking people to help us with directions or to get somewhere. And you wouldn't believe the amount of people who just blow right by you, or like don't even care, or like, pretend like they didn't hear you. So I have this custom of, if I'm going to ask somebody for help and I hear someone walking by, I will literally like put the cane in front of them, or I'll walk right. Otherwise, they would just walk right by.
Right.
And it seems kind of rude, I guess, from my end, but it's also a bit rude on their end to just like blow right by people that are asking for help, especially, but I've gotten into the habit of doing that a lot. But when I had the guide dog, even if I was completely fine, people would just approach. I think it's like just the idea of having the dog. I think people feel, I don't know, some connection, I guess, in a way. It's
This guy has a dog. I have a dog.
yeah, yeah. I'm gonna talk to
you've
this
got
guy.
something in common.
Yeah, exactly. It was great. It was great to pick up girls, though. So I never complained about that. That was always a plus. The cane doesn't really help much with that. You go to a bar with a cane and like no one is talking to you. You're walking with a dog. All of a sudden, you're like having to fight off the chicks.
It's like, wait a minute! Don't distract the dog. I need to get some place.
Yeah, but it's definitely a huge difference, and it's something that I think a lot about. And right now, just given the situation, because of like looking for a job and all of that, it's a little difficult to make the decision of getting another dog. But and it's kind of recent too. It's been less than a year and a half since I had to put my guide dog down, and her name was Layla, by the way. So it's been a year and a half. Less than a year and a half without Layla, and it's still a little tough, I mean, every time I go out, I'm always thinking like, well, if Layla was here, this would be much easier, and I found myself giving the cane commands a couple times, like forward. I was like, oh shit.
Nope, got to do that myself.
So it's definitely been a bit of a learning curve, I guess, just going back to like using the cane and everything.
Well, if you ever tell your cane to sit and then give you a paw or something, it might be time to stop drinking for the night.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, what else did I want to know? Okay, let's get back to the podcast, because I'm sure you get questions about this one all the time. Yeah, I'm sure that Porn for Blindies episode has been sitting around at the top of your most popular for a while. How did that come about?
Well, we always joke around on the podcast about that. We always had this joke about, I wonder if they have a lot of like blind porn actresses or whatever. And like we always joke like, oh, we should write a script about a porn where like everyone's blind or something, So we always joked around, and then I think it was Pornhub released some news a few months back saying that now we have audio described porn videos on our site. They're they're quote unquote professionally described, but like.
Did you pre-screen these clips before you went to the episode, or were you hearing those for the first time?
Some of them. I think a couple of them I did because I just thought it was just this hilarious idea of like watching a porn with description. You know, I just thought it was so funny, and I think I actually mentioned on the episode, like, I don't know, for me it's not interesting. I guess it kind of is, but from a perspective of like I find this really funny more so than like, oh, this is pretty exciting or whatever it is.
Yeah, well,
and and I kept thinking like, what is this going to be like? You know, so we had the great idea of like, okay, let's talk about the whole Pornhub thing. But then my friend who did that particular show with me, John wasn't there unfortunately, but my friend Ben, who did that particular show with me, went to other websites, and then he found, you know, some of the other crazy clips that we heard on that episode.
Some of them sounded like they were just screen readers. Like they weren't even like they weren't somebody describing the action. They were like an automated thing trying to read the screen.
Basically, and it was really funny because it was clear at some point, because you know, with the not with Pornhub but with the other website, I think it was actually called Porn for the Blind, I think pornfortheblind.com or .org or something, I don't recall, but we actually had a laugh because that website actually originally came out of started in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So we had a laugh like, let's go try to find these people and have them on the podcast, you know.
Were you able to figure that out?
No, unfortunately. I don't think the website is still up, but it's not really active or anything, which is a pity because there was some gem on that thing. And it was really funny because, you know, you're able to basically go on the site and upload your own descriptions. So anyone can do it. So it was definitely clear that after a certain point, people just started going on there and creating these ridiculous descriptions that were clearly like messing around, you know? And I'm like, oh gosh, but it was just so funny. I thought it was
got started the same way Facebook got started, right?
Yeah.
Somebody sitting in a dorm at Harvard at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Exactly. And so that's how that came out. You know, it just I heard about the Pornhub thing, and I thought, okay, let's do one just about Pornhub. And then my friend kind of went out and did a lot of different research, and we're planning a part 2, so there might be some more in the future.
Awesome. We'll have to look forward to that. So outside of the podcast and you know, even outside of being blind, you know, you're a 31-year-old guy. You're looking for a job. You single again, or?
Yeah, single again. So, you know, ladies listening.
I mean, you're just a 31-year-old guy right now. You know,
yeah,
looking for a job, looking for a lady, and you know, what are you into? Like what's what do you enjoy doing day to day? Like what are you you know, kind of hobbies and interested in, and
well,
what
I
gets
really
you
enjoy. Yeah, so playing drums, as I mentioned, is you know, I guess you'd call it more of a hobby, more so than anything, just because, you know, I'm not playing with anyone right now. It's just kind of myself practicing and doing things. And my brother always makes fun of me for this one, but I love inline skating. So rollerblading is one of the things that I really enjoy. And my brother.
Tell me about how that happens.
So I just go around with the cane in front of me and hope I don't bump into things.
That sounds like me without the cane, and I can.
And my brother always makes fun of me because he says like, "Oh man, come on, that was you know, that was barely popular in the mid '90s, you know, and you're like rollerblading." I'm like, "Hey, come on, man! I see girls rollerblading around the beach all the time, so who knows, you know, maybe they want a rollerblading partner or something."
Yeah.
But we always have a laugh about that, and but it's basically just me with rollerblades and kind of hoping that, one, I'm not gonna fall, and two, the wheels are not gonna get caught on any weird like stones or cracks on the sidewalk or whatever. just waving my cane around. But it's fun, I guess it's more fun than just regular rollerblading. There's an added component of
Yeah, I guess there is. You ever take the GoPro out for that?
That's another plan that
Yeah,
I have.
we need to see that. You need to get that footage up somewhere. You don't need a job. You just need to go out rollerblading with a GoPro and get monetize some YouTube.
Oh, that would be pretty amazing. I wouldn't mind doing that.
I'm guessing you don't do a lot of raised boardwalks.
No. That might be an interesting one, though. I'm always asking people around, like, hey, you want to go rollerblading? And no, first of all, no one else has rollerblades. No one else
No, that's true. Nobody
buys inline skates. No one buys inline skates, and so I'm like, always the one that's like, okay, whatever, then I'm gonna go myself. So, that's something I like. I like hiking. I like skiing. I haven't been in a few years, but I do enjoy it. Hiking is really fun, just jogging or long walks and things like that. And music is definitely a big thing for me. Music and I really love I just love art in general. So I'm a big fan of like theater and going to plays and going to concerts and just performance art stuff like improv theater or improv comedy, stand up, all of these things. I'm just a big fan of anything where you can kind of express yourself with some type of art, regardless of what it is, if it's music or poetry or whatever, or writing even. I enjoy reading, though I must admit I haven't read a book in a while. I think all those textbooks kind of burnt me out for a little bit. But
I bet.
Planning to get back into that. But
3 degrees in 8 years, man.
It's a little tough. It was just like, I got tired of reading about the history of social work and policy and all of that, though it is important, of course, but it's got a little crazy there after a while.
So do you prefer audio books? Do you prefer Braille? Do you read Braille?
Yeah, I do read Braille. Braille is one of those things that slowly fewer and fewer people who are blind or visually impaired are actually learning, because there's so many other resources out there, be it with audiobooks or even just if you get if you scan a book and you get like a PDF or something like that, your phone or your computer can read that to you.
Yeah.
So there's so many of those things. I mean, I still read Braille, which is great. I think it's a great skill to have, but everything has become more audio based. And even on my last two, the masters that I did, I never had a single Braille book. Everything was all digital.
Wow, we are in a new world. So when you were learning Braille, were you learning Braille at the same time you were learning English?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, that was
at once.
So maybe it helped, like A, B, C. Because
you were learning Braille in English, right? Not
yeah. Because I only lost my sight after, and that was actually, I never thought of that. Maybe that actually did help with the language and just everything in general. That and Howard Stern definitely helped with learning. I listened to a lot of Stern when I could barely understand it, and then next thing I know, I'm understanding all these crazy things, and I'm like, okay, I think I got it. But yeah, with a lot of my reading now, it's all digital, either audio or Word documents or PDF documents, and it's just, and also the technology with screen readers, more as more and more of them get more advanced, you get more natural sounding voices and everything. It's still a little robotic, but it's slowly getting more human like. So it's not that bad to actually sit and listen to a chapter or two of a book, just being read by the computer, something like that. I'm not a huge fan. I'd prefer, an audiobook, but it's not a bad alternative.
Gotcha. Yeah. So two questions related to each other. One, what do you wish people would ask you more, and what do you wish people would stop asking you?
Oh gosh. Okay, so the stop asking stuff. Let's do that first, because I think that's like easier.
How
Because
many of these questions have I asked?
I think of that a lot. No, but actually, the questions that you're asking, I don't mind talking about. I don't mind talking about these things because these are things that interest me as well. But it's things like, you know. Really basic things, like people will ask, okay, how do you brush your teeth? How do you take a shower? How do you pick your own clothes? On a date one time, a girl asked me, oh, how do you have sex? I'm like, okay, let's find out, or
Same
whatever.
way everybody does. we fumble around and we hope for the best.
So, it's because I think like a lot of people, I think the other thing too is like a lot of people, just the general public, has this idea that like every blind person doesn't see anything, and there's a bit of a stereotype of the blind person who doesn't really have a lot of social skills or like I don't know, people usually like to call them like ADLs, activities of daily living. So, like just hygiene and all these little things that you do at home on your own. I think there's still a bit of a stereotype that like people with any type of an impairment, just don't have those skills. And yeah, it's definitely true for some, in some cases, but it's not with everybody. So we get a lot of those questions about like really basic things. I think just the basic stuff is something that you know how do you brush your teeth? How do you like wash your hair in the shower or something? Just there are questions that sometimes seem a little obvious, and we get them a lot. Or just the idea that like people kind of come in and they like to do the whole like, oh, I knew someone who had, who wore glasses, and so yeah, I must imagine what it's like to be blind. Or like I've had, like things that don't really make any sense. People try to kind of like and I guess that's their way to kind of relate to you, but in a way that you're like, well, yeah, that's, that experience is a little different from being blind all the time. I think John actually shared a story of someone who told him one time like, oh, I can really sympathize with you because I did surgery in my eyes like a few years back, and I was in the hospital for 2 days, and I had these things on my eyes, and so I know what it's like to be blind now. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if you really do, And as far as questions that I wish people would ask, that's a tough one. I think maybe not even asking a question so much, but just kind of giving anybody, when you go out there and you see anybody who has any type of an impairment, or whatever the word is that you want to use to describe it, approaching them just like you're talking to anyone else, and kind of just having a conversation and understanding like, well, what is this person's personality, character, what are the things that he or she likes to talk about and likes to do, and all these things. Because I think that there's always this there's still a lot of insecurities too from the part of people who don't have any impairments or anything like that, of like, maybe I'll say the wrong thing, or maybe I'll offend this person if I say this or if I say that, you know. But I think that you kind of have to let that go and just approach it as just a regular conversation. I mean, some of the things that you and I talked about, you know, today, yeah, they're a little specific to the visual impairment, but we're just having a regular conversation, and this is the kind of thing that I enjoy, you know. And I think that
you wish you had more of this in your day to day.
Yeah. I mean, you go to it's always an experience, you know. Go to a restaurant, for example, and let's say I go with someone who's sighted, people automatically kind of go up to the table, and the server goes up to the table and it's like, oh, what does he want to eat? You know, like, I'm like,
Yes,
I'm sitting there like, okay, how would he or she know what I want? You know, like, you know, just, it's kind of this idea of like, there's a lot of people who just approach it with such fear and insecurity about, you know, maybe offending us or something like that. And you know, I probably have to warn people that maybe sometimes it might happen, you know, because there are people out there who don't really want people's help or attention or whatever it is, and it can happen, but it shouldn't stop you from, like, the next time you're in a similar situation to go and talk to somebody. Or, you know, I was joking about the thing of, you know, when I go to a pub or a bar, for example, and when I had Layla with me, everybody would come talk to me. And with the cane, it's one of those things, like, it's more like people kind of avoid you, you know?
everybody sifts down for seats. Yeah.
But it's kind of like that situation, you know? I mean, the dog was a bit of an icebreaker in that way too. It was like,
Right.
people just felt more comfortable, you know. Maybe they come in and they say like, oh, can I pet your dog first? And maybe that makes them feel a little more comfortable to just sit and actually start having a conversation with the person, rather than like seeing somebody with a cane and then you're like, shit, what do I say to them? You know?
Hey man, I notice you can't see.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like,
I don't know. I got nothing left.
hey, want to touch my face?
No, you sound disgusting.
Yeah, it's like, no, thanks, dude. So yeah, I think that's mostly it. I don't really think of like any specific questions. You know, it's just having a conversation in general, and figuring out that you can have any type of conversation. It doesn't have to be all about, you know, all about the visual impairment or the blindness or whatever. It can be about anything. You know, I'll talk to people about anything, really. And, you know, as you can probably tell, Josh, by just listening to the Blind Hour podcast, we'll talk about whatever, you know. And we've had like all different types of guests, and sometimes I'm always a little nervous, thinking like, oh man, maybe, you know, this conversation will be a little hard because I don't really know much about this subject, or this person's approach is a little different than mine and John's. But it always works out as long as you're willing to have a conversation. And it's like that no matter what the person's you know, situation is, you know, whatever it might be. And obviously we kind of talk about it a lot in terms of ethnicity and race and religion and all of that stuff. And it's also important to remember that applies to, you know, impairment and disability or handicap, whatever the word is that you choose. You know, it applies to any different types of differences, you know, that we all kind of are faced with on a day-to-day basis.
Um, what do you hope to see in the future from policymakers? Is there something that can be done on a policy level to make your day-to-day life easier and the lives of people you hope to help through social work?
So there's with the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA,
Yeah.
uh, there are a lot of different, I guess you could call them guidelines that are set for different things. And they're all good and fine. They all, in theory, they should all work great.
Now, this is the guideline that requires ramps on public buildings and elevators,
Mhm.
that kind of stuff, and handicap stalls and restrooms, and
Yeah. So all these basic things that, like, I would imagine that most of us kind of look at and think, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense, but I think that there's still, even though there's still kind of like this idea of like, well, those guidelines are out there, so people are going to meet them. When you go to a job interview, for example, like I've been doing for years,
right.
You still find that a lot of times people have an idea of what it is, but don't really understand it. I think maybe it can be something where there's more education in regard to the ADA and what it covers. Maybe it's something that it has to be more covered in, let's say you go to business school or something like that, and then you have like an entire semester of like ADA policy or something like that. As far as I know, that's not the case, but I think like a lot of people kind of go in, and that's something that maybe you'll talk about in one or two classes, and then it's not talked about anymore, or obviously I said business, but it can be any field of work, really. And I think like having some type of, I don't want to say a consequence, but some type of an incentive for people to actually understand and know these guidelines and understand what the ADA stands for. For as limited as it can be sometimes, it still does a lot of good when those guidelines are followed. An example that I always go back to for me, a personal example, was when I was going to study for my GRE to get into my master's program, and calling them up, and a simple thing as getting adapted study materials, was so complicated, and they made it so difficult to even get materials. Basically their idea was, oh, we have these audio tapes from like the 80s that you can you can listen to. I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure those are outdated, and this was like what, 2008, 2009 that I was
You can
studying.
get a cassette player anymore.
Yeah, barely. Yeah, you barely can, so things like that, and it's a lot of things where people kind of stay just within those guidelines in
Right.
order to not really have any problems or not get any backlash or anything like that. Rather than kind of saying, well, we know that we're within ADA guidelines, but we're not really providing exactly what we say that we're providing. Like their idea of adapted materials was, well, we have a website and we have these tapes, and that's what you use. And if not, you go and you pay for a course, or you buy your own book. And I'm like, okay, I can buy my own book, but then I have to pay for someone to read it for me and all these other things, and it becomes like, it's a very similar thing actually that I'm going through right now with studying for my social work license, where the materials aren't really accessible. So yeah, I think, I guess this is the very long way to say that we need to figure out a way where more people are aware of what the ADA actually is and what it's actually supposed to cover, and especially in terms of employment, where employers are more aware of what they're supposed to offer and what they're supposed to to kind of follow in as far as, all the rules and guidelines that are set by the ADA. And, that applies also a little bit to affirmative action and all of that. So,
right.
It's, yeah, so I don't know. It's something that definitely crosses my mind a lot. I've thought about it a lot, and I've actually talked about it on the Blind Hour podcast before. Just how do you do that? I mean, obviously it would be something that would be pretty major change, but I think it can be done. It's just a matter of it would slowly have to kind of be implemented, and we would have to figure out like what kind of incentives and what kind of things can we do to ensure that.
Right. You wind up having to, you can change the law, but then it takes a long time to,
yeah.
I mean, you can't just, like the law is signed in, and like all of a sudden a ramp doesn't appear, and you don't all of a sudden have digital versions of textbooks. Like you still have to create the stuff, and that takes time and it takes money.
Yeah. I had not to keep going with this, but I had a problem last semester. I actually just finished one of my incomplete courses earlier this month, which was like last week, I guess. It just started anyway. So what happened was I bought the textbooks. I brought them in 3 weeks before the semester started to be scanned. And they're supposed to be scanned right away, and they're supposed to be sent to me as PDFs and everything. Mm-hmm. I bought the textbook. I bring them in 3 weeks before, and I receive, some textbooks, but I don't receive this particular textbook for this one course. And I'm like, okay, what's happening? And they're like, oh, we're trying to get the publisher to send us a digital version of it, and it will probably be here by the end of the week. Okay, this is the first week of classes, so I let it go. Next thing I know, we are 11 weeks in out of 13. I've been communicating back and forth, asking, where's my textbook? Where's my textbook? Week 11, I finally received my textbook. Two weeks left of the whole course. I'm already behind in all these things.
Right.
And, that's a problem. That's the one example where the regulations that are in place didn't work how they're supposed to, and they caused a lot of issues because now all of a sudden I have an incomplete and I have to do all these things and so it's
now you're put out and your professor's put out, and
yeah I mean it's we created a big deal out of it, and hopefully it's not going to happen again for other people. Obviously my professors were on my side with it. We went and we spoke to the head of the department. We had a meeting with other people, but it's just one of those things that it's just you think that that kind of thing wouldn't happen,
So did it wind up being a problem with the school or with the publisher?
It was a problem with the school. They just took too long to scan my book. The Disability Services Office just took forever to scan my book, and even after they would scan it, they wouldn't send me the chapters for some reason, and I kept emailing them and trying to figure out, where the hell's the textbook or whatever. And this was the one that took the longest, by the way, because I had another one. I had 2 more courses that semester, and both of those books took about 5 weeks for me to get them. So yeah, it was definitely a school issue.
Yeah, it sounds it.
Yeah, but that's a good example of that, that you can have the guidelines and you can have all the rules in place and all the laws and everything, but there isn't I don't know if the consequences are really there yet when you don't meet them, So.
Right. Okay, well, we are recording on Monday, the 5th of December. There are 26 days left in this year. What do you hope to accomplish? What do you hope for the world as we head towards 2017?
Well, for personally, I went to finish editing episode 100 of the podcast. That's taken a while. And, for the rest of the year, I think it's just going to be waiting for myself, waiting for the 25th to eat a lot and get ready for the new year. And hoping that we start the year pretty positively. I know that this year has been kind of like a crazy one with the elections and everything, and I think that it's easy to get lost on that and be very negative with like, the person I voted for didn't win, or, the person that won is not who I wanted to be, and like all these things. And I think just definitely trying, though it can be difficult, just trying to kind of approach all of these changes that will be coming up next year and approach them with the most hopeful attitude possible. I think that's really how I see it. Just letting things happen and having the hope for things being positive, and also the attitude of being positive in your own life, and if things aren't really going so well out there, you still have the ability to kind of choose how, in some ways, how things will go in your own life, and how positive you can be about things that are directly surrounding you, with family and with friends and all of that. So I just, I guess my wish is just that, just positivity and hope and good stuff for everyone. I always like to say that I'm the type of person that loves everybody and everything, and I have like a lot of love to give to everyone. If people would just accept it, and that would be really cool. And I think that's what I like to transmit to people, and that's what I hope that people out there listening and everyone else is able to do next year and this year and for years after that.
Awesome. And where can people find you, and where would you like people to find you online and all that good stuff?
Okay, so if you guys are interested on checking out the Blind Hour podcast, you can search on iTunes or Stitcher or like the podcast app, all of that stuff. Also, soundcloud.com/Blind Hour. We have all the episodes up there. You can like the page on Facebook. Just search for the Blind Hour podcast.
All of this will be in the show notes too at joshshear.com.
Yeah, sure.
Links out to your stuff, and you'll be able to find them there. But
yeah, and the email address, if you guys want to talk to me personally, I'll give you guys my personal email, and people can contact me. It's camposmda@gmail.com. That's camposmda@gmail.com. And, we can have a conversation. I love talking to people, and I think you guys can probably tell that from the conversation here. I just enjoy really having good conversations and meeting new people. So that'd be really great.
Yeah, this has definitely been a lot of fun. Hopefully we can do this again for sure.
Oh, definitely. Next time I'll see if I can drag John out of bed and see if he'll join us,
Great. Well, you have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year and all that good stuff. And I hope the job shows up soon, or I hope some prosperity shows up in another way if you can make it on your own there too. Like I said, strap a GoPro on while you're especially in the snow. I mean, come on. I mean, it's soft.
Oh, that'd be pretty sweet.
Can I get you? Can I get you to slide over maybe just a little bit to your right, and and duck down just so that we can get one right there, and now duck down a little bit so we can get your face in the frame. All right, perfect.
Let me turn on the lights too. That might help. I don't know how good they are in this room, but
perfect.
They might be a
Perfect.
little.
Look at that. Now we got a great shot of you
There you go.
that we can
Wearing
throw on
headphones
the. I guessed wrong at what color your shirt was. All right. Yeah. So thanks, man. This was fun.
Yeah, definitely. It was a lot of fun, and thank you. And for you also, happy end of the year and the beginning of a new one. And we'll definitely do it again. And it will be awesome. I feel like I always have stuff to say, so I could probably go all day. So.
Now, wasn't that fun?